Hello, welcome. We're covering test one. All right. Note, okay, that I won't go into as much detail on the second and third tests. Just being a college class, I feel like it's just proper to help you to a smaller degree on the second and third tests. Okay. But you haven't seen my test yet. And hopefully you have looked at the study guide so you won't be um, taken aback or unprepared for that which is going to be asked of you. But the manner by which I ask it, the way I word my questions and all that, that's a lot more subjective. And so I want you to kind of be gently acclimated to it. All right. So I think you'll find that most of these questions can be gleaned from the argumentative assignments. That's why, despite our fast pace, that it is in your best interest to always read all of the sections, regardless of which singular section you choose to analyze and evaluate. All right, so please keep that in mind. That will apply to the second and third tests as well. So much can be gleaned from those argumentative assignments. All right. But sometimes some of the things I are part of my supplemental lecture. So it's always good, not only for your extra credit points, but for that reason, to be present at these Zoom meetings, as some of them you may recall from information I've shared. All right. So if you'll bear with me, this is a good problem to have. A very significant number of you present, trying to make sure that everyone gets his or her extra credit points attached to your grade 1 score. All right, so technically, it is possible to receive over 100% score on this test. All right. So it goes in the order of the subjects that we have done, so which shouldn't be of any shock to anyone. So I'll first ask questions about Native Americans, then about the Spaniards and Spanish colonization and the Black Legend. Then I'll ask questions about oh yes, absolutely. Jose, I apologize. To be honest, I am so technologically lacking in just being adept at doing such things that I'm at the mercy of my wife, and she works decent number of hours per week, and I ask her to help me download the videos because it's still a little bit beyond my capacity. So I will definitely work on that, okay? Because unfortunately, if I could do it myself, then I would I'd be willing to do it as soon. I'd download it as soon as we're done. But a matter of fact, I couldn't do that because it takes oftentimes an hour to for our Zoom video to download, and then I have to put it on YouTube and post it and all that other stuff. But yes, absolutely, I'll make a note of that to put yesterday's video up as soon as possible, as soon as my wife gets home. All right, so jumping right into this, if that's all right. So I have, which of the following is an alleged reason for which knowledge of Native American culture and history is incomplete? Firstly, lack of sufficient written Native American sources. Now remember, I mentioned the codices, I mentioned the stelae, but most of those are in Central America. They're in Latin America. So talking about the Native Americans above the Rio Grande, that is true. There is quite a scarcity of written sources that we have to work with. B, C. Vance Haynes' theory on Native American immigration from Asia does not dovetail with all radiometric carbon dated objects discovered. And you saw that in number 1 of the handout. So you know that's true as well. C, alleged cultural, linguistic, and biological ties between Native Americans and indigenous Siberians have not convinced academia universally. That is true, and that is found in number 1. All right. D, European chronicles are alleged by many to be ethnocentric and skewed. Remember, the chronicles are just that. They're written chronicles from the Euro-Americans, right, from Europe, and their take on Native Americans. And so, as you see in anthropology, etc., it's a very difficult, to some impossible task, to take away your own worldview in writing down and describing another culture and of another group of people with a separate history, etc. So even those with good intentions, oftentimes their views are going to be ethnocentric. Okay. So it's all the above. All right. So notice all of them except for the very first one were found, and D, A and D, but B and C were found in the handout. Number 2, which of the following points was not conveyed concerning Native American cultural achievements? A, European colonizers in modern academia usually look for evidence of manipulation of the environment, development of complex society, artistic expression, knowledge of the sciences and technology, and monotheism as indicators of how, quote, civilized a society is. Absolutely. And I gave that in the lecture, but it's also could be extracted from number 2. B, that considering the isolation of the Americas, the natives' Neolithic or new stone tool or farming revolution was relatively early in some places. Yes, that point is made on number 2. C, that evidence for alleged signs of civilization within future U.S. territories appears earliest in the American Southwest and along the Mississippi. That is true as well. Okay, I lectured on that, and I also had that incorporated into number 2. And D, that the Plains tribes met criteria for civilized status first within future U.S. territory. I did not mention that. That doesn't seem to be true. All right, so that's the one. So sometimes you see in my test, you're actually looking for the wrong answer. And this is the case of D. All right. And please don't just try to write down the letters, because I may have opted for the option of switching up the options of A turning to C, etc. when you see it on Canvas. So look at the data itself, the answers themselves, rather than focusing upon the letters. What was mentioned as common cultural traits shared by many American tribes despite their diversity. This was number 3 of the handout. A religious tendency toward animism, shamanism, polytheism, and pantheism. Absolutely. Technological knowledge of mining minerals, not universally. No. Development of military technology superior to that of European colonizers. No. Failure to engage in sedentary farming prior to European invasion. Of course, that's not true. All right. So let's see here. 2 stereotypical images of Native Americans commonly portrayed in European chronicles are innocent and childlike. Remember the ovejas mansas, the meek sheep image, propagated by Las Casas as well as by Columbus, or bestial savages, the one that you get a little bit from Castillo. That is true. 5, even by today's standards, Spanish colonization of the Americas was democratic, pluralistic, and tolerant. By today's standards, no way. And that's part of the Black legend, them serving as an anti-model. Number 6, at the time of Spanish colonization of the Americas, Western Europe was arguably, slowly, transitioning toward a limitedly and brutally capitalistic economy. I lectured that, and that also was found in number 1 of the Black Legend handout and number 1 of the Southern Colonies handout. 7, which of the following was not arguably an historical contribution by the Spanish to the Americas? Now, I stopped at this part when I went over the PowerPoint. Okay, so this one was lecture. So A, a monotheistic belief in the Christian God. Yes, that was a Spanish contribution. Elements of law we have borrowed from Rome and Germanic sources. Yes, I mentioned that. Modern notions of private ownership of property and of urban development, I also mentioned that. They had to teach the Native American tribes how to cultivate the land? No. In some places, as in California, they did, but in most of the places where they came and colonized, they were long into their cultural evolution of having complex societies, sedentary places that they lived in, with agriculture and all that. And then many elements of Hispanic culture is true as well. So you see the one that doesn't fit. To give credit where credit may or may not be due, the Spanish, this is on the last number of the Black Legend handout, were arguably more apt to allow, quote, Negro slaves to buy their freedom. That's true. B, had a system of accountability known as the Juez de Residencia, and I mentioned that, putting people on trial for misuse of power. So both those are true, and they're both found on the last number of the Black Legend handout when they deflected to the English and said, were the English any better? Las Casas, his brief relation of the destruction of the Indies, openly sympathized with Native Americans, often labeling them as meek sheep, in order to sway Crown policy and public opinion toward legislative protection of natives' rights. Absolutely. Castillo's, his true history, Historia Verdadera, somewhat justified Spanish conquest of the Aztec, depicting the latter as anything but meek sheep. That is true as well. Sahagún was subjectively used by the instructor as evidence for the contention by some that by today's standards, even those early modern Euro-Americans who showed great intentions of treating natives well were not above the assumption that paternalistic, like being their father, action ought to be taken to make the natives change culturally, especially religiously. And I made that point. I conveyed that by lecture. I remember Sahagún was the one that did the quote about them sacrificing their children to the rain god. And they were all crying as they were doing it. And he said the blame should not be imputed on the parents, nor on the leaders who have been blinded by Satan to do such an infernal deed, etc. So clearly he thought, even though he was a protector of the natives, that they ought to be converted. 12, Junipero Serra, what was discussed about him? This was the one where it said the missions were a mixed bag. Okay, so look at C, the juxtaposition of praises for Spanish mission friars as benevolent paternalistic defenders of the Native Americans' rights, with criticism of them as ethnocentric tyrants, forcing cultural genocide on the missions. That's the one that you're looking for. Number 13, Don Juan de Oñate was subjectively mentioned in class as a perfect case challenging the Black Legend, and that multiculturalism and democracy were highly respected and frequently practiced in Spanish New Mexico. No, I said the opposite. I said, remember that if you subjectively, if someone asked me as a student to write a narrative of Spanish colonization that adhered to the Black Legend, that made villains of the Spanish, and it had to be somewhere within U.S. territory, I would focus on New Mexico. Lots of power plays, lots of violence, rebellion, oppression, etc. Number 14, which of the following does not constitute a region under modern U.S. by the Spanish adelantados, those who went forward to claim new pagan lands? I mentioned all of them except the last one. I didn't mention anything about the Northeast of the U.S., like Massachusetts. Which of the following was not mentioned in characterizing Spanish colonization of the Americas? The Spanish colonizers were, by today's standards, religiously ethnocentric. Yes, found in number 2. Spanish authorities generally intended the Spanish Americas to be hierarchical. Yes, founded on number 3. The Spanish colony of New Mexico was depicted as anomalously or out of the ordinary, tolerant and democratic. No way. That one is the one you've picked. That's the one that does not fit. All right. Number 16. I always will give the ones that say textbook because I didn't ask you to use a textbook. I go back and forth, and oftentimes just in summer, especially with such a fast course, I almost don't have time for the textbook, and also I don't want you to have to pay that money. So obviously I'll give you those, no matter what, on test 2 and 3 as well. The textbook illustrates how French colonization exercised an influence disproportionate to their numbers. And that is true. Alan Brinkley, American History Connecting to the Past, is the book that I use when I ask students to use one. So that's the book I'm referring to that you didn't have to buy. Number 17, the textbook claims that rigid royal Spanish policies stifled economic development in the Americas. Yes, that is true. The author is an old school liberal, so he's for capitalism. So he's not going to like Spanish mercantilist restrictions that say only the select few with the proper papers can trade in this commodity, can trade here at this port, and others can't. Number 18, a section from the Southern Colonies handout contends that colonial Virginia afforded an economically and politically equal playing field for all English colonists. That's almost a trick question, because that comes from number 1 of the Southern Colonies handout. And I say capitalism for better and for worse. And I do boast on number 1, right, that more opportunities were presented suddenly in the early modern era in the Virginia Chesapeake area for more people who had previously been marginalized, right? We mentioned indentured servitude as an opportunity for advancement. We mentioned squatters' rights of going and claiming lands not your own and enriching yourself from that. We mentioned being an adventurer for the joint stock companies, even if you had no money. Nevertheless, the negative side was that clearly those who were already wealthy had a huge advantage over them. And that never changed. So because of that, the whole thesis, number 18, is false. Court American History portrayed John Smith as the embodiment of American leadership by merit or talent. And yes, I did say that. Remember, we used the term sagacity in David Price's book in Love and Hate at Jamestown. That's court history. So it has to be taken, to an extent with a grain of salt. It's praising American leaders. Number 20, Helen Roundtree depicts the encounter between Euro-Americans and the Native Americans. Remember Powhatan against the Jamestown settlement? Look at the bottom one. From the perspective of the Native American Powhatan Confederacy, depicting the latter as patient, long-suffering, and tactical, while portraying the English as greedy, dishonest, and ungrateful. That one clearly also is found right out of the handout. Number 21, the Southern Colonies handout highlighted instances of agency being recognized among non-WASP minorities. What was not mentioned? So we mentioned the fact that Powhatan had power to easily wipe out Jamestown on the number of Roundtree's book. We mentioned the Huron and Natchez, Choctaw, and other tribes along the Mississippi River throwing their weight around to maintain control in their best interest with the French. We mentioned African Americans taking advantage of an acute need for their labor in South Carolina. We mentioned nothing about women. So because I did not mention women, that one is the one you choose, because technically it was not mentioned. But what I don't like about this question, and I intend to change, is I also would like to make it more incorrect by having the information on it incorrect. Because ironically, yes, I didn't mention it, but what I have in D actually has truth to it. Women acquiring their political and economic rights early in the Chesapeake, even if socially they were still stifled in expectations for them to remain ladylike. We don't have time to get into that right now, but there is a lot of truth to that. But I didn't mention it, so it's still the one you pick. 22, Alan Brinkley, the dude who wrote the textbook that you're not using, contends in the textbook that the Spanish's command over Indian labor did not fully meet the demands for labor, so they opted for African slaves subsequently. That is true. So remember the economic interpretation to slavery? That's part of it, right? He embraces that interpretation. Number 23, which of the following was mentioned as factual support of the thesis that slavery was not a racist but practical and convenient institution? A, diminishing numbers and reliability of white indentured servants? Absolutely. Remember Bacon's Rebellion? B, the biological success of African Americans against New World pathogens? Absolutely. That they were, quote, hardier physically. C, diplomacy with Native American tribes. I mentioned that as well. I think in writing, and I know by lecture, that it was becoming too costly with war with the native tribes to enslave them. So it'd be all the above. 24, the instructor cited Howard Zinn's take on Bacon's Rebellion as a possible microcosm or mini example of all except, look at B and C. An inequitable society, especially plagued by false promises to would-be successfully independent farmers, high on expectations and low on education, could form a combustible atmosphere just waiting for rebellion to explode or tyrannical demagogues to take over. That's exactly what I explained with Bacon's Rebellion. C, many Southern governments and planters may have opted for slave labor after this rebellion. That is mentioned also in the economic argument for slavery. So the one that does not fit is A. Capitalism created the incentive that prompted colonists to increase agricultural productivity. Just no. Okay. Number 25, which of the following is true concerning the legacy of racism brought to and maintained in the Americas? A, medieval chroniclers' racist depictions of sub-Saharan Africans were read and even translated by some in Virginia, and that's clearly in the number. B, as seen with Hugh Davis, miscegenation or interethnic sex and marriage was immediately taboo. Absolutely. C, as with Anthony Johnson and John Punch, early court and legislative decisions were made on the basis of skin color, and those are in that number, and I spoke about them. D, a decision to subjugate African Americans was made and having status follow the mother and via the slave codes. So that actually is all true. All right. So much of these, okay, can be gleaned from the argumentative assignments alone. 26, French Louisiana's official and unofficial defiance of old world mercantilist restrictions upon opportunities for non-nobles was depicted in the Southern Colonies handout as having emanated from the genuine egalitarian idealism of her leaders? No way. Remember I said French Louisiana became fluid by accident, not design. So if you read the very last number of the Southern Colonies handout, you'll know that 26 is false. Number 27, the French were depicted in Southern Colonies handout as having greatly abused their strength in numbers and in resources in order to dictate terms to the native tribes. No, we said the opposite. And if you read the handout, you'll know that that is the opposite of the truth. This one, all right, is I still just use it in lecture 28. I'm not sure that it's in there in the argumentative assignments. The author of Albion C suggests all but or except which the demographic that was able to establish first effective settlement, and I know I mentioned that concept, of each subsequent English Northern American colony fashioned its future folkways in its own likeness. That's exactly the thesis of that book. B, that the South's seigneurial economy, wealth, status, power, and opportunities tied to land ownership and command over others' agricultural or pastoral labor, its elitist and chivalric culture, and other folkways were primarily the result of the gentry classes' first effective settlement of that area of the South. And I did mention that. I spoke about that. See that most English immigrants to the Southern colonies were liberty-loving, egalitarian Democrats? Absolutely not. All right. Number 29, which of the following does not match? Roger Williams was depicted as a well-meaning progressive advocate for religious freedom, which may have been encouraged by the intolerant mistreatment he had endured from Puritan authorities in Boston. I just spoke on that yesterday. That is true. At least that's how I depicted it. B, William Penn was depicted as relatively sincere in his Quaker conversion and in his desire to embody meekness and brotherly love in issuing his Charter of Liberties, a proclamation of religious freedom in Pennsylvania. Absolutely. The number on court history of William Penn. It has that. C, Dutch New Netherlands was depicted as having transferred tolerant policies back in the Netherlands to the New World without any hint of dampening those policies with ulterior practical economic motives and concerns. That's the one that's false. Because remember, my last number on the Northern Colonies handout has the more cynical thesis that the Dutch were merely tolerant in New Netherlands, in New York, for economic reasons, not for ideological reasons. Number 30, William Penn renounced his autocratic rule over Pennsylvania, willingly granting political rights and powers and economic resources and opportunities to, quote, commoners, including some marginalized and persecuted non-English folk from Europe. That's all in that number, and I spoke about it. 31, while Penn showed courtesy and respect to Native Americans regarding diplomacy, evidence suggests that he also enthusiastically pressed Native American tribes to sell him their territory without seeming concerned for their future. And I told you yesterday that that was about the biggest dirt that I could find on him. So that also is true. Number 32, coverage of the New England colonies until the concession that some of their institutions, church and government, were relatively, compared to others then, democratic and progressive. That's the very first number of the New England or Northern colonies handout. So that is true. 33, class coverage of the New England colonies conceded that Puritans could be overbearing or tyrannical in demands for conformity amidst their rather angst-filled covenant notion, and downright imperialist bullies in their foreign policy. And all of that is found in number 2. And I spoke on it. Number 34, an argumentative section contends with the court history notion that the Dutch colonizers of New York were progressive cosmopolitans practicing tolerance on principle, implying that official Dutch tolerance in later New York may have been at least partially due to economic concerns. And again, that one's true. The very last number of the Northern Colonies handout. Number 35, according to Alan Brinkley, the textbook dude, the British Navigation Acts were stifling to American colonists as they successfully upheld mercantilist policies that limited colonist economic opportunities. Now, this, I apologize, I may take 2 or 3 of these out in future instances or semesters, but it doesn't affect you. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to segue into the very next topic after test 1, and that's the War for Independence. That's what this is relevant to. So you haven't read anything on it yet. You don't have the textbook to go and find out if this is true or not. So of course I give you this one. This is false. Okay. The textbook of Alan Brinkley does not believe that the Navigation Acts of England that were to enforce mercantilist restrictions as to who can do what economically for a living. The textbook that I use does not contend that those rules were oppressive and stifling. Okay, but just the opposite, as we're going to get into as soon as this test is finished. Number 36, which of the following is false regarding the sacred expedition? Junipero Serra and the Franciscan missionaries coming up and from order of 1769 to establish 21 missions in California. It marked what the Spanish officially declared to be a more peaceful colonization of Upper as opposed to Baja California. That is true. It initiated a Spanish colonization pattern of establishing missions, pueblos or cities, presidios or military forts, and haciendas, right, which are plantations. That is true. Spanish missions have consistently and universally been praised as paternalistic purveyors of civilization. No, that's court history. That does not mean that that interpretation has consistently and universally been accepted, not even close. So that last one is false. That's the one you're looking for. Number 37, in the St. Lawrence River and Ohio Valley, tribes like the Iroquois took advantage of European demand for furs and militarily ensconced themselves into an economically vital partner position. They took over lands from the Huron so that they could be the providers of the fur, which was making so much money. So that is true. Number 38, St. Augustine, Florida, established by the Spanish, is the oldest surviving Euro-American city. That is true. 1565. Number 39, the Puritan societal notion of the covenant arguably formed the foundation for their tolerance of individual lifestyles. No, remember, if you were there with me yesterday, I contended just the opposite, right? The notion that God is watching the entire Puritan community, and if people start sinning, God is going to punish the whole community. So it lent to a rather oppressive environment, whereby the Puritan authorities spied on their own people and tried to strictly force people to adhere to biblical values. And number 40, this is like number 35. It's pertaining to the War for Independence. I don't expect you to know this yet. We're going to get into it next. As kind of a segue, though. Tories in the English Parliament during the 1770s allied themselves with the colonists in demanding colonial rights as English subjects. They did not. That's false. The Tories were the political party in England who wanted to put us in our place, who felt like we were spoiled, ungrateful brats, and they needed to become tougher on us as a group of colonies. All right. So does anybody have any questions? Did I go over any of them too quickly?
Can you go over number 3?
I'm sorry, Saharsh?
Can you go over number 3 real quick?
Number 3, sure. So what was mentioned as common cultural traits shared by many American tribes, despite their diversity, what you're looking at is the very first one. Because remember, that comes right out of, what was it, number 3 of the Native American handout? A religious tendency toward animism, shamanism, polytheism, and pantheism. So remember, I focused on number 3 of the first assignment on religious similarities that Native Americans had, as well as similar failure to practice a proprietorship-oriented notion of private property, as well as allowing themselves to be taken advantage of in trade, as reasons for which the Euro-Americans began to look down upon them and take advantage of them. So everything in that first section of number 3 was religious, as you see all those religious terms on option A. B is not true because it was not universally practiced to mine minerals. C, they did not have superior military technology. Even the mighty Maya and Aztec couldn't contend with the crossbows and the gunpowder of the Spaniards. Failure to engage in sedentary farming prior to the European invasion. No, that's silly, right? In some places in Mexico, before Christ, they were farming. And so certainly they had farming prior to 1492 when the Europeans came. So all the others are false. Anybody else?
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Hi, sorry to bother. I was hoping that you could run number 6 again, if possible.
Of course. Of course. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
being
sir.
so polite. But no, please
Yes, sir.
feel free. This is what I'm here for. So number 6,
thank you.
time of Spanish colonization of the Americas, Western Europe was arguably slowly transitioning toward a limitedly and brutally capitalistic economy. I make that claim as true in both number 1 of the Black Legend and number 1 of the Southern Colonies. So yeah, it's a pretty popular notion But I embraced it as true as your instructor.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem, Miguel. Anybody else?
Can
Any other
you
numbers?
go over 7, 19, and 39, please?
7, 19, and 39. Just remind me after 7 if I don't remember that the subsequent two. Number 7, which is one
Okay.
was not arguably an historical contribution by the Spanish to the Americas. Monotheistic belief in the Christian God, of course, they brought to the Americas. Law that was both Roman and Germanic, yes. Modern notions of proprietorship, of ownership of private property, and of urban or city development, yes. Hispanic culture, yes. So the one that doesn't fit on 7 is that they had to teach Native Americans how to cultivate the land. That's the one you're looking for that does not fit. Because of course, in most areas, they did not have to teach them. They had already long been practicing cultivation. Number 19, Court American history portrayed John Smith as the embodiment of American leadership by merit or talent. Yes, that is true. And that was found in the number on David Price's book, Love and Hate in Jamestown. That's the court image. And I'm sorry, Joey, did you say 36?
39, please.
39. Okay. The Puritans' societal notion of the covenant arguably formed the foundation for their tolerance of individual lifestyles. No way. That one's false. Because remember, with that kind of angst that they had with the covenant, that God was always watching the community and was willing and ready to punish the community when people began sinning, it made them very oppressively involved in everyone's business to make sure people were not sinning in Boston. So yeah, that one for sure is false.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. All right, anybody else? Okay, so I see here that you have it. This test is officially assigned tomorrow, and then you have until Sunday night, the 25th, and then Monday we got to jump right into the War for Independence. So yeah, so recall, okay, you have unlimited submissions. It's open note. You go ahead and utilize your argumentative assignments. And but please submit it by midnight of Sunday, June 25th. All right.
I do have one more question for you.
Sure.
The questions that we just went over, are these the only questions that will be on the test, or are there going to be like some other different ones?
No, this is it. This is
Okay.
the exact test. These are the exact questions you're going to find on Canvas. Like I said, I may have hit the option to for the computer to digitally scatter the options so that A won't always be the same as my A. You know what I mean? Mixing A through D up. But other than that possibility, it's going to be just like this. This is
Okay,
it.
thank you.
No problem. All right. So please, again, okay, I don't want you guys to feel disappointed and let down when we do tests 2 and 3. What I do then is I have 2 kind of barometers, measuring sticks I use to when it comes to share day like this with tests 2 and 3 in the near future. Firstly, I go right to the textbook questions because I'm always going to give you those because clearly, you know, how could you be asked a question from a book that I didn't require of you? But then secondly, I look for questions that are not readily found in the argumentative assignments. And I thought, you know what, maybe I think I just lectured that and maybe they couldn't make it to that Zoom, or maybe they don't recall me lecturing that from the Zoom. So I'll go over those. But all that which I feel they should know from the argumentative assignments, and the answers are found within those argumentative assignments, I'm going to leave them alone and not even go over them for tests 2 and 3. Okay. So I just want to kind of warn you of that. I won't go through all numbers like this again, because I just feel, it's college and you're not accustomed to my style of writing tests. And so I feel like I owe that to you on the first test. But then after that, you kind of get your wings and I feel like you could fly. But please remind me, okay, if I don't do so in the next few days, from the very get-go, as soon as you're done with test 1, I want to provide you with a study guide for test 2. So you could look at that and say, okay, I'm reading this in number 2 of this particular assignment, and I see that it's tied to number 8 on test 2. So you could, prepare for test 2 as you're going along. All right, so do you guys feel relatively good about test 1 now that I've gone through it? Thank you, Joey Miguel. All right, so remember, you have unlimited attempts. So keep taking that darn thing until you ace it. All right. Good luck with that. And yeah, and I'll try to catch up not only on the grading, but also with the Canvas messages if you've been trying to message me. And like I said, if it's a case of emergency, I even have a cell phone number on the syllabus that you could use. All right. So I wish you well. I'm proud of you guys. Like I said, this is the best turnout for Zoom meetings that I literally have ever had as an instructor. And I've been doing it, just since COVID, but still. So thank you. Thank you for attending so faithfully. And that will be reflected on your grade. And if that's okay with you guys, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. All right. And I'll see you Monday. And we'll have finished test 2 or test 1. And we'll be diving into the War for Independence. All right. Thank you, Miguel. All right. You guys take care. Okay. Good luck. Take your time. Take as many times as you have to.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys. Thank you. Thank you.